All right. You guys ready to kick things off?
Yes.
All right. So we're going to be talking about this. I want this to be interactive. Interrupt me, ask questions. So let's start with an interview question that I like to ask. The reason I like to ask this question is it's quickly apparent as to whether or not somebody knows the common kind of conventional understanding of what this is, or whether or not somebody actually knows the concept of this. So we've got an object here. We've got a method inside of our object that just does a console log for the current value of this. So everybody here is going to be able to answer the question, what does this log?
My map.
So this is the, my object. And so if you ask people why, they'll come up with various kind of explanations. And this gets kind of a bad rep in the JavaScript community. And in my opinion, that rep is kind of undeserved because it's a simple concept that is just always explained terribly. I don't know why that is. Even Eloquent JavaScript, which is a really great book in a lot of ways, does a really bad job of describing this. But I was lucky enough to come across a book early on when I was first learning JavaScript that just explained it perfectly. And it's stuck with me ever since. And I've never heard that explanation repeated anywhere else, and I've always wondered why. That book is JavaScript: The Good Parts by Douglas Crockford. And, that book hasn't aged particularly well. And there's a lot of things that he calls out as bad parts in that book, which are actually kind of interesting parts. But his explanation of how this works was awesome. All right, so this is the question that I ask in interviews. If I create a variable and I set it equal to that, what will this console log? Any guesses?
I would guess my object. No, my map. An empty object.
Yeah, all good guesses.
The browser. The browser.
Yeah, it'll console log out the global object. And so the answers you guys gave, and I appreciate you just volunteering that, are common answers, right? They're the common answers you hear in our industry, in interviews, and even in interviews where somebody can kind of guess or kind of derive that it might be a trick question, and can arrive at the right answer, that global object, often can't answer the follow-up question, which is why? Why did it console log out window? Yeah, that's a common one. That's a common one. Thanks for volunteering that. Context. That's the one I hear most often, and that's what you would assume it to be, right? Like if JavaScript wasn't insane.
Where the function's actually being called.
It's not where, and that thanks for bringing that up. It's not where, and that's what seems like the obvious answer, right? And that's where that context comes from, and so this is the one takeaway from this meeting, which is how Douglas Crockford explained it way back in '08 or whenever that book came out. It's not where the method is invoked, it's how. This picks up a value 100% by how the method is invoked. So if I make this reference to it, I'm invoking it without the I'm going to say context, but I don't want that to kind of muddy the waters. If I were to do something like this, and just wrap this. So now we've got my object, sub object. That's going to get the full thing. And if I were to like destructure that, right now that we've got destructuring in the language, if I were to destructure that sub object out and call it directly, we'd get the sub object. Or if I destructure the actual method out, I get that. And so let's say there's two ways. Let's see. Do I want to talk about call first, or do I want to talk about? Let's talk about call first, and I'll circle back. So has everybody messed around with the call method on functions? It comes up, from time to time where you've got, let's see, what did I call that? My method. So that's the actual function. So the .call method. The very first argument to .call is a way to override. However the method is invoked, you can override that value and manually pass in that this context. And so, if I were to do my object, of course, I'm going to get we'll get my object, sub object. What did I call that? Sub. And apply works the same way. If you haven't used apply, the only difference between the two is call takes positional arguments, and apply takes an array. That's it. That's the only difference between the two. So if you ever look at what say we're not worried about this argument. If you ever look at what this transpiles into, that Babel gives you back or TypeScript gives you back, it's actually apply. They just call apply for you with the things that you pass in. So the way that it's invoked is how it picks up the value, the context, however we want to call that. So if we move it around, the way it's invoked is going to change. If we pass it as a callback, for example, it's going to change, and so that's where call and apply and bind all come into play. Has anybody ever tried to do this? Let's see. Yeah. And then, has anybody ever tried that in frustration after having typed in console too many times? So if you do this, or if you did this a year and a half ago, it would say some error message about the context, can't call, method log of, something. And the reason is because we've changed how we're invoking it. Nowadays, browsers pre-bind console.log. Firefox and Chrome did that. And I didn't notice when it went in, but it's been in for a year and a half, 2 years. But this didn't used to be a thing. It is now. Back in the day, you had to do console like that. And oftentimes, I'll still use the same idea if I want to call a method like a function. This comes up in RxJS from time to time with custom operators. I've used it a few times. So, any questions so far? Okay. So say like we've got, let's talk about a few of the things that we can do with this. Let's talk about call, apply, and bind. So say, in our function body here, or in our HTML body here, we've got an unordered list. Oops. All right, just switched over to Firefox and I'm still kind of stumbling around. I think this will work. Okay. So say like we've got document.query selector all. Okay, we get back a node list, which is not an array. You guys have probably done this, or at least some of you have probably done this, where you've got this node list. It's not an array, but you'd kind of like to be able to use it as an array. Say you want to map over it or something like that, and you can. There's no map method. Yep, there is a for each. I want to say it's a relatively recent addition. Let's say like you had a hard set on map. You can change the context of how a map is called with call. And so you can say, map, your context is now this, and now the function that you pass in, under HTML, let's see. Map call. Am I missing anything out of these? Argument 0, function array map. It's been a little while since I've done this. Am I missing something dumb? I am. Interesting. Yeah, sorry, been a little while. Yeah, so this is manually specifying the context of that node list, and now we get access to our map, and we can like pluck values out of there. Yeah, like a bunch of form fields, for example. This might be useful. This is a way to do, say, a reduce operation over a bunch of form fields. And the same is going to be true of apply. It just depends on whether or not you've got an array or a bunch of positional arguments. And the distinction doesn't really matter now that we've got the args, what do you call it? Anyway, the ESX edition with .args.
Just use array.from. Do whatever you want with it.
You can. That will create a new array. So thanks for mentioning that. I think the difference between that and this, just off the top of my head, is array from will create a new array with, I don't know, will it convert, will it cast the DOM nodes into array items? So they end up at a similar end result, and but they're doing slightly different things under the covers. And I'm not sure if you'd ever care about the distinction. I don't know if there's like a performance difference between allocating a new array if you've got a bunch of DOM nodes or doing this. Yeah, it's a good question. I have no idea. But thanks for mentioning, because you're right, that does arrive at the same end result, and maybe with some less arcane syntax, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's talk about bind a little bit. So we did bind with console log. Let me ask you guys, what is the difference between, I'll bet you guys have seen this at some point, maybe in legacy code. This kind of pattern doesn't come up in React land very often. What is this? Have you guys seen that before? So this is a way to capture the value of this inside of a closure so that you can safely pass around a function because it's been saved. You don't have to worry about invocation, because the invocation is saved in the inner function, and then you've got the value to the parent scope from that kind of outer scope. So what we talked about 2 weeks ago, something like that, when we were talking about how to do crazy tricks with closures, that's all this is. It's just a way to save that initial invocation. So my question to you guys is, say like we were to do something like this, we're wrapping this and we're returning a new function. What's the difference between that and the equivalent where we've got a, yeah. Any thoughts? Console.log bind is going to return something new, so keep that in mind. But yeah, functionally, is there any kind of difference between capturing this in a closure or just binding this?
I've definitely used them interchangeably.
Interchangeably?
I don't know if there is a difference.
Unless there's some specific thing you're doing in the closure, I'm not doing it here in this example, you're still creating a temporary function. You're creating a new function with the value of this that you want, that you care about. And bind is going to return a copy of the function with that value hard-coded, right? Once you run bind, as I think you guys all know, that's permanent. There's no getting that back. That's been bound forever. But in both cases, we're creating a temporary function with the value of this that we care about. So as far as I know, there's no functional difference. There's no memory difference or performance difference. You can end up with two functions no matter what. Bind can also be used for partial application, which is kind of fun, which is kind of an aside to talking about this. But say you had some kind of like Ajax function that took a few positional parameters like the method, the path, any params, and it was a function that made an Ajax call. However, right? We'll just stub that out.
Error.
You could do something like ajax.bind. In this case, we're not using the value of this, so we're just going to bind it to null or undefined or whatever. It doesn't matter. And then we can do get, or we could do is equal to right, something like that. Or, yeah. Has anybody ever used bind like this? It's kind of a neat built-in. And again, you're just making copies of functions. But, yeah, nice that it's right built into the language. You don't need, say, Lodash to do partial application, if it's simple. Let's see, what else did I want to...
Is this all Lodash is doing under the hood?
No. Lodash, I don't know how up-to-date this is or how universally applicable this is, but I haven't seen Lodash make heavy use of bind under the hood. The reason I think that's the case, so this is just me speculating, but bind used to be slow and expensive back in the days before the Chrome team in V8 really started making big inroads into performant JavaScript. And so, back when Lodash was still, just fresh on the scene, their claim to fame was faster everything. Even when ES5 started to be broadly adopted in browsers, and we had native support for map, filter, and reduce, Lodash's map, filter, and reduce was still way faster. And the reason is they were just using for loops under the hood. They were not using the browser native map, filter, and reduce because they had not been optimized yet. Nowadays, I'd be very surprised if that's still the case. But that was certainly true of bind as well. So my guess is Lodash used the closure hack. for bind. Let's see. What else did I want to talk about? All right, last but not least, this doesn't come up very often in React land. We don't do very much object-oriented programming, but if you have done object-oriented programming, or you ever dabble in Angular or whatever else where that's a little bit more of a thing, there's always kind of a question about how do you take an object, a class, and how do you augment that class with new methods, and there's a lot of kind of good advice and bad advice around how to do that. Subclassing, you have as abstract a class as possible, and you subclass it with specific methods. That ends up often being kind of an anti-pattern, that subclassing approach. And in the grand scheme of object-oriented kind of philosophy, there's different ways to go about adding functionality to a class, often represented by a tree, like going from. Never mind. We don't have time to get into object-oriented stuff in this meeting. Anyway, oftentimes the preferred way that people say to augment a class is with mixins. This is certainly true of the Python community, and it's been true of the JavaScript community, or I guess pockets of the JavaScript community back when. So say we've got a class in JavaScript. I'm not going to use the new class keyword, so users. So before the class keyword was added to JavaScript, the way you would make classes in JavaScript is you would say something like paths users. And if you leave out the return statement, it just does an implicit return of this. And then to create an instance of this class, you would do users is equal to new users. So now we've got a users dot path. Right. So that was classes in JavaScript before they added the keyword, and so you can abuse the this keyword to do a really interesting mix-in pattern that a guy named Angus Kroll. He used to work for Twitter. He's a really interesting guy. He doesn't present as often as I'd like because he's got a bit of a stutter, but he's always fascinating when he talks. He wrote a book called If Hemingway Wrote JavaScript, and he's just, he's got the Fibonacci sequence or this pattern or that pattern, done as various authors, famous authors in history, and he's definitely yeah, it's a fascinating read. So he came up with this idea called functional mixins, and basically the way it goes is you define a function called, let's see, I'll make an as Ajax. Actually, we're running a little short on time, so if you don't mind, I'll just copy and paste some stuff. Let's see, that was too much stuff.
How do you copy copy it?
I do a highlight, and then I will say I want all of that, and then I'll put it into the plus register. You can't talk and Vim at the same time, apparently. There we go. I'll put it into the plus register. So, and that's a great way to get things into and out of Vim because it doesn't run afoul of that paste problem, the set paste problem. All right, so this is it. So say we've got a few classes. We've got a users class that defines a path. Maybe we've got some other methods that are doing various things. We got an organizations class with some method that's doing something totally different. And these two classes don't really have anything in common, right? Subclassing doesn't make sense here because users and organizations, they're two totally separate things. But we've got this shared bit of functionality that we want to add to both classes, which is we want to make API calls from both of them. So we define this functional mixin, as he calls it, with as Ajax. And what as Ajax does is it references this, And it's assuming that you've added a this.path to your class. But otherwise, it's just adding more things to this. And then the way you mix it in is you do asAjax.call, and then the method of your class, or the prototype for your class. And so if you do something like that, now you've got users.ajax. No, fetch. I called it fetch. Let's see. I didn't make them. Users equals new users. Now we should have a users.fetch. Yeah, and it returns a promise. So we've mixed in this fetch behavior to both classes. It's neat, and it's really succinct, and that lets that allows you to have this kind of utility of a bunch of mix-in functions that are all pure, sort of, even though they're putting things on this. But yeah, they're standalone. They can be mixed into any other class that adheres to the contract, to the larger contract. So I don't know. It's kind of a neat pattern, but we don't see it in the React community. It feels like object-oriented programming is kind of losing its steam. I said we'd end early, and
took mixins out of components, or did they?
Yeah,
Is
and that
which
mixing
version
pattern
did
was
that?
different than this one.
We could probably do that. Or did they actually take that? You know,
They took out the official mix-in pattern.
they did take that out. I remember doing that 2 years ago.
But there's no reason that we couldn't do this ourselves with React components. Like one of the nice things about React using classes rather than that kind of custom object constructor thingy that they had been using is all of the semantics around classes are known. Like we could use this pattern with React classes if we had a reason to. I'm not sure that there's a good reason to. Yeah.
So, just one interesting comment about this. Arrow functions don't have this because they're not prototype. Yeah, so you can do interesting things with arrow functions that way as well.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So, in large part, arrow functions are sort of the answer to, or sort of a workaround to this being confusing. You know, so if you've got this kind of construct, and this is an arrow function instead, any guesses as to what this will pick up? And the reason is it picks up whatever this is bound to in the lexical scope here. So since we haven't done anything with it, since we're not wrapping my object in something else that's doing something with this, it's just going to pick up that window object. And so in a lot of ways, arrow functions are kind of a solution to the problem of this being confusing. In other ways, you can think of them as just kind of working around the problem. But yeah, so now that you guys have this this different way to think about a method, if you ever see something that's using this, then there's one of two options. You can see directly how that thing is invoked, and you can see how it picks up this value, or it's been hard coded at some point. It's been bound, and I don't know of an easy way to tell if it's been one or the other. But now, if you've got something standalone, there should be no question as to what the value is going to be when you run it, unless it's been bound.
So is that why you can take advantage of class properties that you can do like in React, right? To not have to bind this every time you basically you're using an arrow function, like syntax, wondering methods.
Yeah. There's I'm not sure if that's in the spec though, is it? Because Dan always brought it up in his talks, like we're going to use officially spec stuff for it, and he had to use bind on all these methods.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily the React. I'm wondering if that's how class property like the spec works because of arrow functions.
Well, aren't arrow functions sugar for function with a bind this at the end of it?
No.
They're not that?
No, no, I'm glad you asked that. Thanks for asking that. Arrow functions are decidedly not a function where this has been bound. I thought that as well, and I'll bet that's a common way to think of them. They don't deal with this at all. In fact, I have no idea what happens if you try and bind an arrow function. I would hope it doesn't work. Let's see.
Where did that well, when they were first coming out, that's what the saying was.
Window is expected.
You can't, 'cause there's not a prototype. I was going to say there's it's not a function. Oh.
JavaScript never throws an
Yeah.
error. Go out of its way.
Okay, so this is the result I'd hope for. So thanks for asking the question, Sam. With arrow functions, it's not that this has been bound. It's that this is completely non-applicable to an arrow function. It's the same as any other value in the lexical scope, and that's it. If it's in scope, that's what it is. Back to, let's see. I don't remember what this proposal is called. I think Sam is right in that it's still in a proposal phase. Help me out with the syntax here. It goes.
It's like an arrow function without const.
Let's see.
We do it in our components all the time. I think we even made the loop
It equals. Yeah.
did that.
Right, and I've seen this in use to like set what are they called? Isaiah, you were asking about this a couple of weeks ago. To set not properties on the instance, but properties on static properties, right?
Yep.
I don't know what this desugars to answer your question. Let's see. Wonder. Yeah. Still on the pipeline. Yeah, I don't know what it desugars into, but the end result is you can do. Is that right? Instead of having to create a new instance of it, it's a way to create a static method.
Yeah, you don't have to bind
Okay.
it to this.
Where the is that?
We use it all the time. So.
Anyway, we're over time. I'm definitely happy to hang out and chat more. But thanks for coming.
Seth, if you don't mind, you said explicitly this could be summed up in one sentence, but I didn't hear that sentence.
What is that?
How?
What is that sentence?
The sentence is, I wanted to look up JavaScript, the good parts, before I came, and I got sidetracked on the MX React components repo. But anyway, the sentence is how the method is invoked, not where.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if it's invoked as part of a chain of things, or if it's invoked on its own, or if it's invoked with call or apply, all of those things are the same thing. They're just different syntaxes for the same thing. So it's how it's invoked, not where.